Okay, it should be going now. Thank you, sir. All right, so let's create this one. We've talked about it enough. Let's create this first method. So let's create a new project. Get everything open here. I'm going to open Visual. Phew. I tell you, I don't know if I can handle the orangey pink. How do you guys feel about it shining at you? Huh? Won't let you. Did it let you? Other people were getting security violations. It what? Burns your eyes? Yeah, you must have special privileges.
I did it on this one.
Did you? And it let you? Well, we were in 107 when they weren't able to. So I wonder if you can in here and not over there. Because I definitely will.
I can.
Can you? Okay, good. It must be our room. Okay, let me get this one open, and then let's create. Yeah, it will definitely reset when you log in, but that's okay. Sometimes it's worth it for that color. All right, so I want to create a new project here, and we're just going to be working with this section of Chapter 4 really just for today as far as practicing, but then we're going to take the stuff that we do today and apply that to the information about classes that we're going to be working on next week. So I'm going to call this project Chapter 4 Method Practice 102. So let's rename our program.cs. And I'm going to rename this to be our tester. And when, can't talk right. When we're working with our program.cs, you'll see as we start next week, we'll be moving away from it a little bit. It won't be so important to us anymore. It's just going to become just our tester, just a thing that we have to use to test the things that are really important. So we'll be beginning to move our code out of our main and out of our main method. So that'll help us to see some things. Now for this program, we're going to start out. Sorry, it's showing me different things than I thought. Let's start out creating some variables. For this program, we're going to be asking our user, we're really going to be keeping track of an inventory of albums or CDs, like music information. So we're going to start out in our main with some variables that will be helpful in tracking this information. So first of all, we're going to use an ID, and this is going to be like an album ID or some sort of unique ID that we would assign to each thing within our music store. And then I'd also like to have another string that is the album or CD name. Zoom in a little bit more there. And then let's keep track of an integer that is the number of tracks on that media. Also because we need to mess with an integer. And then lastly, let's create a decimal variable to hold the cost. Now, as you see from our hierarchy chart, we're going to have an input string method to prompt people for those string items. We're going to use our input int method to prompt our users for that integer item. And we'll use our input decimal method to prompt people for a decimal item. So I'm going to create our method first. I'm going to leave these variables up here, and then I'm going to comment the end of our main methods, curly brace. I'm going to keep commenting these things because we're going to be putting our new code after our main method. Now the pink curly brace is the end of our class, And for me, the orange one is the end of the namespace. So there's a lot of different philosophies about programming. Since we know what all of our methods are going to be, we could go through and kind of outline, put all those method headers in our code and be kind of ready for them. C# doesn't like us doing that very well, because anytime we're going to have a return value, like an integer, we have to have a return statement or the compiler won't compile it. So if we start doing our outlines first, we can end up having to do quite a bit of work actually to make that happen. So instead, we're just going to create the method and then call it. And then we'll create the next method and call it. So we want to put this method right after the end of our main method. Now, when we create a method in C#, the minimum amount of stuff that we can use is that special term void and then the method name. Now, looking at this method definition, again, it's the minimum. I have to at least have this return type set to void if I'm not returning any value in my method name. I'd like for this method to do a write statement, so I think I better go up to the top and fix my using statements. Now I can fix my method. So all I want to do in this method is write out a line, and we're just going to say something like, welcome to the audio track. And then I'll comment my closing curly brace that that's the end of the display instructions method. We're going to come back and put a little bit more in that method header, the method signature, and we'll also be adding some comments. But I'd like to try to put our call in first so that you can see some things. Now I want to call this method from our main. So in our main, right after we declare our decimal cost, let's put in our call. And all we do, call the method, is just print its name. Now the curly braces are empty, both on our call and our declaration, because this method has no input. It doesn't have any input frame. I've got red underline. What's it say? What's the matter? What?
Access non-static method and static context.
Okay, so this is why we want to get away from our main next week. Static means there's only one in memory. So no matter what I'm talking about, there's only going to be one in memory. So when would I want to use something that's static? Well, let's think about a company who has many, many locations, and each location has invoices, right? And so every location needs an invoice number every time they generate an invoice. But that number has to be unique throughout the whole company. So that means at the corporate level, I'm going to have a static invoice number or next invoice number field that I give to people that ask for that next invoice number. But no matter what, I only want one of those within the company. So I don't care if the branch is in Springfield or in Dallas or in San Francisco, they're going to come to the corporate office to get that next invoice number, and we're going to give it to them because we're going to have this static next invoice. Well, so if I can only have one, why do I need to use the keyword static here? Because we're running it from our main. And anytime we're running a main method, we can only have one because the main method says it's static. So inherently, within C#, we're limited if we're using that main method. Everything that we call from our main method has to be labeled static. So I have to come to my display instructions method, and I have to put that keyword static. And then my error should go away. So now that's all fine and good because I am only going to be displaying one set of instructions on this one computer, right? I don't need a bunch of people all doing it at the same time. But we're going to get to next week where we want some multiple of things and see how that works. All right, great. So we've got our display instructions. Let's put a read after that just to make that console pause. And then let's run and see if our instruction line is generating correctly. There it is. Welcome to the audio track. Woohoo! Everybody get it okay? So let's check this. What is going on there? On your display instructions, come down. Let's set up a breakpoint so we can use this in debugger. And let's set a breakpoint right here where we call display instructions. Whoops, click. So one way to set that breakpoint is just find that line of code, come over here to this gray bar and click. Or you could right click and set breakpoint, or you could use your breakpoint debug menu and set the breakpoint a bunch of different ways. Now that you've got your breakpoint set, let's run. Now right away, execution is halted for me right here at the display instructions command. Notice your locals window that it's showing you all the variables that we've created and that they're just sitting there with default values. We don't have anything going on with them yet, but they are showing up. So when I click to step into this code, execution is going to transfer from my main method to my display instructions method. Let's watch it. There it goes. So now we're sitting at that opening curly brace for our display instructions method. We're ready to execute that method. If we click step into, we should see that write statement be executed. Then the end of our method. And then if we step into again, we should see now we're back to our main method. And if we step into again, we'll be at the read statement. So notice how you can just use that debugger to see exactly what's going on. Now we didn't change any of our local variables or anything in that method. We just output that data. You should be able to see. Notice how your execution is switching, branching from your main to that new method. Okay, I'm going to turn off this breakpoint and turn off my execution. It's still running. Now, I thought that it would be nice if we updated our display instructions method with the username. Like to have it say their name or something right as it displays the instructions. So let's create a string variable. And we'll call it username. Now I'm going to set this variable equal to a value. And I was wondering, can we just ask Windows what their name is? And I found we could use this environment class. And from the environment class, if you do the dot and let IntelliSense give you the drop-down list of everything that's available, you'll see there's a lot of things available from the environment that we're working with. But we just like to get their username from Windows. So environment is kind of like, hey, Windows, what's their username? Now to use this username, I need to pass it as an input parameter to our display instructions. So I'm going to put it in the parentheses. And now we have a parameter. It's made it very mad though. It says this method has 0 parameters and you're saying it has 1. So that error will go away as soon as we update our method. So let's do it. In our method, we have to say what data type that parameter is. It's a string. And we're going to call it username. Now let's add our comments. I'm going to do 3 slashes so that Visual Studio automatically adds comments here for me. And notice it says, oh, you have a parameter, username. Okay, so in our comments, let's put some info about the method signature. First, we have the static. And that is a keyword that specifies there is only one. Then we have that keyword void. That means there is no return. We don't return anything from this method. Display instructions is the method name. And then when we had empty parentheses, that meant there were no parameters. Now that we have parameters, string, username, we have the data type and name of the parameter. So it's not very different from a lot of other languages. It's very similar to Python, except that we have to always be specifying what data type we're working with. So it's just a little bit more needy about that type information.
So is that declaring that as a variable inside of that method?
It is. That's a really good point. So our username variable is going to be available within that method, just the same as if we had declared it as a string. So let's use it. I want to put it in our write statement. So after we write out their welcome, let's add in that username. I'm going to put a space after my keyword track so it's not all squished up together. Now let's try it. So it's just getting our account name, right, from OTC. When I tried it at home, it did actually say my name, and I'm sure it depends on how your computer is set up. But I thought it was neat for you guys to see that you could go out to Windows and get that environment information like that. Remember, there's some benefits to having a programming language that was built by Microsoft, right? To communicate with all those other Microsoft things. Okay, so has everybody got a username showing up? Good. So we went from, yes, sir?
Can you do that from passwords?
No, they're actually pretty good about that. They won't let you at all.
Probably could somehow, but it would make it easier.
Not with that environment parameter. I think you'd have to be a little trickier. Probably with like CC instead of C#. Okay, so we've got our display instructions. That looks good. Now we need to create our input string method. So our input string, before we do that, I want to output some stuff. Let's right here at our read, let's write out a line with all of our fields so that we see all of our data and we can know what's changing. So it's kind of a troubleshooting thing, but let's output some stuff. So I want to start out with the album ID. And when I wanted to use those interpolated strings that you guys spoilt me with so bad last time, I just can't go back now that we started using them. So I'm going to have one line for our ID. Why is it complaining?
There's nothing in ID yet.
Well, I have it there.
It's not assigned or anything.
So what does it want?
I want you to assign something to ID.
Like a value?
Yeah.
So even though we saw, looking at our debugger, we saw that Visual Studio had basically assigned a value. It had made these null strings, right? The compiler doesn't care. It's going to still make us do it manually. So even though C# is going to take care of it kind of behind the scenes for us, it's going to be a jerk and make us put values in there. I'm going to go ahead and set our numeric values equal to 0.
Well, the numeric values are equal to 0.
So try it without them and you'll see it does the same thing. Let's make sure it does though, because You know, they always change it. Well, it shouldn't because we saw it assign the value of 0 to him.
No one 0.
Uh-huh. And so it shouldn't be so needy, but it just terribly is. All right, so after our ID, let's write out our album. And we'll just call it album. The next thing that we want to write out is going to be our number of tracks. So here we can check and see if the compiler is going to complain about that not being initialized. I'm just going to put num tracks so I don't run out of space. And sure enough, it gripes about it not being assigned a value of 0. So we can see there's some inconsistency there. We saw from the debugger that those values had already been assigned, but it doesn't care. It makes us do it again. Now, after our number of tracks, let's do our cost. I don't think there's anything else we need. That should be good.
A cool thing, I don't know, I realized if you just open right and hit the $sign, it will open your quotations for you.
Automatically?
Yeah, you don't have to like go back and put it
back and forth.
Yeah, it automatically opens your $sign. It recognizes.
Isn't that neat? So cool. Okay, so for this method, we're going to be creating a method to prompt for a string input. So we're going to use this method to ask the user for the ID and the album both, because they're both strings. So let's write our method first. I'm going to scroll down, and I want to put this after our display instructions. Now, when you guys are creating methods, there is no rules about what order to put them in. The only thing is to be careful to make sure that all of your code is going within the curly braces that you want it to be within. You might like to put your methods alphabetically. You might like to put the ones that are called by this method close to that method. There's all sorts of different ways to do it. So there's no perfect way, no right way, no wrong way. Yes, sir.
Sorry to make you back
You're
up
fine.
a little bit. I feel like I'm missing something. What is the purpose of the $sign when we're doing our right line?
Guys, explain it to him.
It's where you can do string and variables inside the quotation, but I don't know the exact term for the Jira thing.
Yeah. Okay.
So remember before we had to put the 0 and then we did the comma ID?
Yeah.
So it's just a newer way of doing it. Thank you, sir. But either way is fine.
Oh,
Yes, sir.
is there a particular reason you didn't do the $sign thing with the username in the method?
No,
Display instructions method?
there isn't. We can do it the same way there. That's fine too. So, yeah. Sometimes I'll sacrifice that consistency to remind people that there's other ways to do it. But if you were writing the program, I think you're better off to be consistent the whole way through.
What's like the common practice? I know you should want that one for the $sign straight, but what's the like common practice in the field right now? C# like that?
Don't use a console app. Sorry, that's the cut. But anytime we start asking questions about a console app, how often do you use them? We don't run into these things once we get past our console app. So we might still use some of the string interpolation, and I think you would want to use the one that you think looks the best in your code. If you have a preference that you like one way over the other, that's what you should do. But yeah, hopefully we'll get away from the console. And we actually have, no more console program. I was looking, and we'll do class stuff, object-oriented stuff this week and next week. And then after spring break, we'll have arrays and a couple of other topics. And then our last quarter of the semester will all be the GUI stuff. So we'll be able to do a lot with GUI applications, and you can see a lot about how different they are. So you won't be stuck on the console the whole semester. Goodness. All right, so let's create a new method. Now this method is going to return a string. So let's do a string. And we said we were going to call it input string. And when I use this method, I want to use it once to get the ID of our album and once to get the album name. So I'm going to need something passed to me about what those words should be, what the prompt should be, because I want to use the same method for both of those. So let's say we're going to have a parameter that will be our prompt, the words. So we all we'll need to do then in this method is enter the param, and I want this to be interpolated. I better use that same word that I used there in that parameter. Now we're saying that our message is going to say enter the prompt. So whatever gets passed to us in that prompt is what we'll finish that message with. After that message gets displayed, we want to do a read line to read what the user types in. Whatever the user types in, we want to send back to our main method. So we're just going to do a return statement right there on our read line. So the return statement says, take this and return it to the calling method. That's all we need for that input string method. I'm going to comment this closing curly brace, end of input string method. Now let's call it. We do have to move around a little bit more in our code, but it does make each piece of code so much more simple. I want to call it right after our display instructions, and this first time we call it, we're going to be looking for the ID field. So I'm going to set the ID field equal to the return value. So I want to input a string, and then the prompt I want to send it is ID. Now, so that means my prompt should say, enter the ID. So that should work. Let's run it.
Would it be a bad idea, like set ID to ID and then set ID when it calls itself?
Say that again.
Like you can make ID equal to ID, like the plot, and then it calls itself to reset itself.
I don't think I understand what you mean. You'll have to show me. Let's run it like this and then we'll fix it with fancy stuff. That sounds good. I'm thinking you're actually a little ahead. Oh, I need a new line on that message, enter the prompt, so that it starts on its own line. Okay, so enter the ID. I can make it whatever. And now I'm going to get my output here. ID 45, album nothing, num tracks 0, cost 0. I need to put some new lines on that too, huh? Let's fix it. So for each of our interpolated strings, I'll put the \n at the beginning. And then the next time we run, that message should look a lot better. But that worked, so let's use our input string method again to get the album name. Now, because our parameter is a string, it doesn't matter how long we make that prompt. We can make it shorter or longer. enter the album name. And now we should see both of those in our output display. Is it good? Everybody's working okay? Working. Should we set a breakpoint and run through it? Let's do it. Let's set a breakpoint here where we're going to get the album name. It's going to be a little bit different. There it is. Than our first one, but not too different. I'm going to start this. Now I'm going to enter an ID. I haven't got to my breakpoint yet. Now I have, since I've already entered one piece of data, I can see a little bit more in my locals now. I can see my ID is set to 45 already. My username is already set. Now I'll F11, go into our input string method. Our prompt, as you see, is showing to the side there that it's set to album name. It's also showing down here at the bottom that it's set to album name. If you step into again, we should see the write statement. Now, when we try to type something in here, it won't show up. Joe's album. But it does actually happen. So you can just type something, then press F11 again, and the read line will actually read in whatever you typed. Working with the console again, it gets a little weird. But as I keep executing, I should end up back at my main with my album now having a value. And then I can see that I'm going to write out all of those values. Does that make sense? Guess good? You okay? All is well with the world? Let's do an integer. I'm going to turn off this breakpoint. Now I'm going to come to the end of my input string method to create my new method. This one's going to ask for an integer to be input, so our return value is going to be int. We're still going to pass in a string that'll be our prompt so that we can prompt them for multiple things. We're going to start out with our write statement like before. Enter the prompt. But now this time, because we're wanting an integer, we need to do some data validation. So we'll go into a while loop and say, while my int.tryparse of the read line output to, I want to output it to an integer called temp. Right there. Thanks. Okay, so check out our while loop here. We're saying, take whatever you find from reading the line, the input, and try to parse it as an integer. If you can, put that output into an integer variable named temp. If you can't, do this code that we're going to put in here. And what we want to do is write out a line saying that that was invalid data. I need to go to a new line. And then I want to redo that same prompt that I've already sent out. Now, when we're working with this method, prompt is a method variable. Let's put that here in a comment. Prompt is a local variable, local to this method. So that means I can't access that variable back in my main, right? It's a variable that's only in this method. What about our temp variable here? Once our while loop is through, that's the variable that we need to return to our callers. That's our valid integer. So is that going to work? Will it let us access that variable? No, it won't, will it? Because we declared it as part of that while loop, so it's only available within that while loop. So we need to declare it ourselves outside of that loop so that we can access it when the loop is complete. Then I should be able to return temp without any problem. Now that's going to be the end of our input int method.
Do you always have to return something?
Only if you say in your method header that you're going to. So if you put that word void, then you don't have to. So it's actually from that, and it takes a second to get used to because it's just so different than other languages. Now we haven't called this one yet, right? So let's put in our call for this input int. It's going to be in our main. And so right now we've gotten our ID and our album name. So we want to get our num tracks from our input int. Now see if it works. We should be able to run this. I'll put in our album ID and a name. And then the number of tracks. Try putting in something invalid, and you should get your invalid data message. And then when you finally put in a valid integer, it should take it, and you should see all of your output. The assignment that's your hypergrade assignment this week is a lot like this one. So most of the stuff for this week is a lot like this, where you're going to have probably like a display instructions method, some sort of input method, and output. So it's not going to be one where you have to do any calculations or anything. It's managing your data. Remember, for this week when I grade, I'm going to be making sure you have methods. So that's going to be the thing that's required. So if it works, that'll be most of the points. But if it works and has methods, that's all of the points. So make sure we have methods. Now, we're leaving this off because I want you guys to come up with the input decimal method on your own with people around you. So we need one more method. We need the input decimal, and we need it to get our cost. So let's take about 10, 15 minutes here and see if you can get that coded in with the beautiful people around you.
Outside the wild. It's trying to return to outside the wild. It doesn't exist outside the wild. I need to put it. I couldn't give it my first right. Okay. In temp. And then you can get rid of the int on your hot state. Oh, here. Yeah.
Yeah.
Think about how you would do that. That's our only other thing I know.
Yeah.
I know.
I didn't copy it, just put it up like that. No, that's all.
Yeah. Yeah, the rest of our time, you guys, is for lab time. There's a new repo out there that has about 10. They should go very quick, just like this. So if you get stuck on one, let me know. Yes, there is a hypergrade assignment in this for a lot like this one.
When am I done with this?
What was it last time?
Sounds so loud.
I'll tell you what. It really changed around here the last couple of years. I don't know what people are saying.
Yes.
Yeah, there you go. No, I wanted to see if it was right too. So we'll just both look at it. Okay, I think we got it. Yes,
Whoa.
I don't even know when we start using read-line changes that we just start the one there first. So I think what happened is we both ran into this problem with hypergrade. I think we all
I love every session should be stop using and I
Just so. Okay. You do taste. Oh, because up here on the cons, you have an extra box. You need to do string prompts.
A string,
You need an extra box because you're.
but isn't it a number?
Yeah, but you're getting the number in.
Oh, in a string?
Yeah.
Boom.
Yeah, right here. That was for your house.
So I don't need to declare it here then.
Well, but you're not trying to pass the number, you're trying to like the number.
Okay, so this
No,
is.
that's fine. Yeah, I passed the points because we were getting this. Cost. So then it passes extra. And then I declare my next variable. It'll be a decimal. And then since you're trying to return a decimal, you also want to change that number in your decimal.
Oh, it's a decimal.
Yes. You need to change your trend price. And then that should work.
And this needs to be.
Yeah. And the return is price.
Okay, so if we have.
That's a little different from what you're trying to do, but that's a step in the right direction, at least.
Actually, I have an idea.
Decimal tracks equal decimal number tracks. We'll see what that does. Well, I mean, I still think you need the parentheses. I think.
I have the parentheses around it.
Oh, I couldn't see them. I'm blind.
So. If we hold that.
I have 0.01.
Okay, 1 second. So I do.